I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, high-stakes meeting. President Joe Biden hosts a leader from Israel as the war in the Middle East rages on. We're at the White House. Back to work. Members of Congress return to Capitol Hill and welcome newly elected members for orientation. Stepping down. Why the head of the Anglican Church of England is resigning. Plus, they meet again. A preview of the relationship between President-elect Trump and the Vatican. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Jehoshaphat. Our top story tonight as his term in office quickly winds down and with the conflict in the Middle East still raging, President Joe Biden welcomes Israeli President Isaac Herzog to the White House, reaffirming strong American support for its Mideast ally. The meeting comes as international aid groups say Israel has failed to meet U.S. demands, allowing greater humanitarian access to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. Tonight, as we speak, time is running out for the Biden administration to try to bring peace to the Middle East, free the remaining hostages, and get more aid into Gaza.
A large column of black smoke rises over the skyline of the Gaza Strip, another sign of Israel's military offensive in the besieged territory. And as the war in the Middle East continues on multiple fronts, President Joe Biden sits down with Israeli President Isaac Herzog.
Well, Mr. President, welcome back to the Oval Office in the White House. You've been a friend for a long time, a personal friend, and you know my commitment to Israel is ironclad, and we share a deep friendship.
And in Gaza, we have 101 hostages, over 400 days. I know, Mr. President, that you're day in, day out actively seeking their safe return home as they are going through hell in the dungeons of Gaza.
The Biden administration says Israel has made some good but limited progress in increasing the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and therefore it will not limit arms transfers to Israel as it had threatened to a month ago if the situation had not improved. Administration officials say that progress to date must be supplemented and sustained.
And we are in a discussion with the Israelis about both the important steps Israel has taken as a result of the United States intervention, as well as additional steps that need to be taken. So those conversations continue, those discussions continue.
These international issues will soon pass to President-elect Donald Trump, who reportedly plans to pick Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Rubio recently told EWTN Trump will use American strength as deterrence to avoid wars.
We are the greatest country in the world. We're the richest. We're the most powerful. But we, too, have limited resources. Every country does. And so we have to invest both our time and our money on things that serve our core national interest.
And separately tonight, President Biden also met here today with Indonesia's brand new president, talking a free and open Indo-Pacific and more. And tomorrow, President Biden welcomes President-elect Donald Trump here at the White House. Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And speaking of nominations, we are learning that former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee could be the next U.S. ambassador to Israel. President-elect Donald Trump nominated Huckabee this afternoon, saying the former Arkansas governor would work tirelessly to bring peace to the Middle East. And we are also getting a better idea of what President-elect Trump's cabinet will look like. He is tapping trusted allies for key positions, offering a preview into how certain policies will take shape. As Owen mentioned earlier, President-elect Trump is likely to pick Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Rubio and Trump had a rocky relationship in the past, but now the Florida senator is a staunch supporter. In an interview with EWTN, Rubio addressed the situation on the border.
If an illegal migrant crosses the border, let's say that person was a murderer in some other country, and they come to the United States and are committing crimes here, where do we think they're going? They're not going to Beverly Hills. Okay, they're not going to some fancy community somewhere. They're not going to where all these celebrities live. They are going to Hispanic communities. That is where they are going. That's who they are terrorizing.
Other choices reflect the president-elect's tough-on-immigration stance as well, including his former acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director, Tom Homan, as border czar, and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem as Secretary of Homeland Security. Noem is an outspoken critic of the Biden administration's border policy.
Our history is proudly built on the stories of our ancestors who came to this country for opportunity and for a new beginning. But today, many of those who are entering our country under the current policies of the Biden administration are known terrorists.
Stephen Miller, another immigration hardliner, will be Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Other picks include Florida Representative and former Green Beret Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor, New York Representative Elise Stefanik as United Nations Ambassador, and former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin to head the Environmental Protection Agency. Zeldin, a longtime Trump supporter, posted on X, "We will restore U.S. energy dominance while protecting access to clean air and water." President-elect Trump is also pushing for the next Senate Majority Leader to allow recess appointments, allowing him to install some officials without Senate confirmation. Well, a New York judge has delayed a ruling on whether to undo President-elect Donald Trump's conviction in a hush money case. Trump's lawyers argued his election victory last week warrants a dismissal of the case. Judge Juan Merchan says that he is delaying the ruling until November 19th so that prosecutors can decide what to do ahead of Trump's return to the White House. A jury convicted Trump back in May on charges of falsifying business records. Our Congress is back for the first time in 6 weeks and starting a busy lame duck session. Republican congressional leaders are also scrambling to get ready for Donald Trump's first 100 days in office, rolling out an ambitious agenda. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with that story. Eric.
Good evening, Tracy. A lot needs to get done during this lame duck session, like funding the government, along with passing a defense authorization and even a farm bill. Congress only has about 5 weeks before the 118th Congress ends, just before Christmas. But right now, House Republican leaders are looking ahead to January 20th, when President-elect Donald Trump takes control of the White House. And House Speaker Mike Johnson wants to hit the ground running.
The American people want us to implement and deliver that America First agenda. And we have to do that while we have that energy and that excitement beginning on the very first day of the Congress in the new year.
House Speaker Mike Johnson says he and the entire Republican conference plan to meet with President Trump tomorrow morning prior to Trump's meeting with President Biden at the White House. Republican leaders also want to pass a budget to fund the government that lasts till next September, something even members of the House Freedom Caucus and its new leader, Catholic Congressman Andy Harris, agrees with, as long as defense spending increases before then.
I think we generally would consider it. We'd prefer that we have a crack at it next year, mid-year, so that we don't lock in the spending for the whole year.
Republicans tell me they want the Trump administration to have a say on government funding and a continuing resolution.
But he also wants to get to September so that he can give his conference time to get a reconciliation package through the Congress, and so that they can start implementing Trump agenda in the first 100 days rather than having to deal with a government funding package in the middle of March.
Democrats are in the minority of both chambers, but Congressman Jim McGovern, a Catholic, tells me they still plan to be the watchdog.
We're going to have to be a guardrail, and the press is going to have to be a guardrail, and average citizens are going to have to be a guardrail and use their constitutional right to freedom of speech to speak up and out against policies that we deplore.
Over the last few days, a number of House races have been resolved. Republicans lead Democrats 214 to 205 right now. Now, they still need 4 more to capture the majority, but political experts are projecting Republicans will have about the same number of seats as they did this Congress. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
One other news, the leader of the Church of England and ceremonial head of the worldwide Anglican Communion has resigned over a sex abuse scandal. Archbishop Justin Welby made the decision after a probe found that he failed to inform police after he discovered repeated physical and sexual abuse at Christian summer camps. Some church leaders said that Welby lost the confidence of his clergy. In a statement, the Archbishop of Canterbury says that stepping down is, quote, in the best interests of the Church of England, which I dearly love. And for analysis, we turn now to Father Dwight Longnecker, pastor of Our Lady of the Rosary Church in Greenville, South Carolina, and a former Anglican priest. He is also an author. Father Dwight, great to have you with us today. First, what was your reaction when you learned that Archbishop Welby was stepping down?
Well, the Church of England at the moment is historically, it is in decline, and Welby's leadership has been vacillating and weak for the nearly decade that over a decade that he's been in office. And it seems to me, knowing a little bit about the politics of the Church of England, that perhaps he was pressured out by discontented forces within the church.
For those that maybe haven't been following this, don't know much about it, tell us a little bit more about what happened and some of these sexual abuse claims.
Yeah, the abuse is primarily, the abuser was a layman, actually. It was not a clergyman. John Smythe was a lawyer in England, and he was running some boys' camps in England in the 70s and 80s. And he developed a ministry as a kind of spiritual mentor to these boys, and he would subject them to physical punishment. I'm not sure of all the details, but I suspect it was probably over their personal sexual sins. He would gain their confidence. He would and then he would take them out to his garden shed, where he would beat them mercilessly. And that sort of sadistic punishment that he was inflicting on them is the heart of the scandal that's going on right now.
Yeah, Father Dwight, give us a little bit of perspective here about the prominence of the role of the Archbishop of Canterbury and him stepping down. Tell us a little bit more about that.
You have to repeat your question, please.
Sure, no problem. Can you kind of give us a perspective here about how prominent the role is of the Archbishop of Canterbury and also the significance of his stepping down?
Yeah, he should not be thought of as an Anglican pope. He is essentially the Archbishop of the Diocese of Canterbury, and he also has a leadership role in the Church of England and a kind of historical leadership role in the Anglican Communion worldwide. But authority the way the Pope does for Catholics. And the Church of England is governed instead by the General Synod, which is a kind of parliament made up of three houses: the laity, the clergy, and the bishops. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, therefore, is a little bit like the king in England in as much as he's a historic figurehead for the church, but he doesn't really have that much authority. He's respected and has status, but he doesn't have a sort of theological or legal authority in the same way that, say, the Pope would.
Yeah, almost out of time here, but what will the selection process be like for the next Archbishop of Canterbury?
The Archbishop will be selected by a Crown Nominations Committee. Remember, the Church of England is the established church in England, so therefore, technically, the King Charles III will appoint the new Archbishop of Canterbury. However, the names will be put forward and selected by the Crown Nominations Committee, which is made up of 17 members who are drawn from the Anglican Communion and drawn from the Diocese of Canterbury and also drawn from the General Synod. And they will meet together under the chairmanship of someone appointed by the Prime Minister, and they will put 2 or 3 names forward. The Prime Minister's office will then select the one that they want to recommend to the King, and the King will then formally appoint the new Archbishop.
Yeah, we'll see what happens from there. Thank you so much, Father Dwight, for your insights. We appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
In Louisiana, a judge has blocked a state law requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms. A law which was set to go into effect on January 1st was called unconstitutional on its face by a federal judge. Louisiana's Attorney General Elizabeth Murrow plans to appeal. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including not doing enough. Why human rights group says the United Nations needs to work harder on protecting civilians in Sudan. And 2 planes shot after a new leader was chosen in a Caribbean island nation. We have the latest. Welcome back. The Federal Aviation Administration has banned U.S. flights to Haiti for the next 30 days. This comes a day after 2 airliners were shot out, forcing Haiti's airport to close. The violence erupted at the same time a new prime minister took office. As you can see in the video right here, sounds of gunfire were heard on the streets while armored cars and armed police took cover behind walls. Despite efforts to stop the breakout, gangs shot 2 airplanes, injuring a flight attendant. Meantime, the new prime minister promises to work with international partners to restore peace and hold long-awaited elections. A human rights group says the United Nations is not doing enough to protect civilians in Sudan's war. In the past month, a powerful paramilitary force has gone on a rampage, killing dozens of people and raping women and girls. Human Rights Watch says the crimes will stop only when met with a strong global response. The war between Sudan's military and the paramilitary group has been raging for more than 18 months, driving 1 million people from their homes and pushing part of the country into a famine. For analysis now, we turn to Alberto Fernandez, a former U.S. diplomat and a contributor for EWTN News. He spent 2 years working in Sudan. Ambassador Fernandez, great to be with you today. A lot to get to here, but first, tell us more about the situation right now in Sudan and about the latest attack by the Rapid Support Forces on Saturday.
Well, unfortunately, Sudan is the world's worst or largest humanitarian crisis. We hear a lot about Gaza or Lebanon or Ukraine, but in terms of sheer size and numbers, Sudan is the worst. What's happened most recently is a series of really violent, brutal attacks by the Rapid Support Forces in a specific part of Sudan, which has caught the world's attention. But that kind of stuff has been happening here and there, on and off, by the Rapid Support Force and actually by the Army as well over the last, since the beginning of the wars in April of 2023.
Yeah, and what caused this paramilitary group to increase its attacks?
Well, the paramilitary group, by its very nature, it's a predatory force that was set up by the previous regime with the help of the Army. So the Army and the RSF were partners in crime for many years. But the RSF was set up as a group of raiders, of militias, of ethnically based tribesmen who were unleashed against adversaries. And the latest spout of violence, this brutality that we've seen, has an ethnic or tribal dimension as well, which accounts for part of the brutality.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, the Human Rights Group says a strong global response is needed. I want to talk more about that. I know the UN has issued sanctions against 2 generals as part of that paramilitary group, as well as the U.S. Treasury. But what has that actually done?
Well, to be frank, it hasn't done a lot. The sanctions in Sudan is an old story. This is a country that's been sanctioned many times by the West, by the United States. Remember, they used to be on our terrorism list and lots of other lists. So this is a problem, is the sanctions are kind of a slap on the wrist, especially when you have an active war situation.
Yeah, and what would you like to see world leaders do in this situation? How should they address this situation in Sudan?
I mean, the problem is when we talk about peacekeepers and all of that, that's somewhat unrealistic given the current world scenario. Certainly what is needed is, at the very least, a ceasefire, a humanitarian ceasefire. The Sudanese people in the area of Wad Madani and Sinar and all of that, but in other places as well. For example, Human Rights Watch and others focus on this specific area where there's some violence, but there's another area in Darfur, city of 2 million people, which is seeing tremendous violence now. So there are no easy solutions, but certainly working for a humanitarian pause or ceasefire, so at the very least hurting civilians in Sudan can get help and can get food and can get medical assistance, is at least one half step that we could do.
Yeah, Ambassador, we're almost out of time here, but as you know, we have a new president-elect. What would you like to see this new administration do in the future when it comes to Sudan?
Well, I'm optimistic that the administration will realize that Africa is an important place in the world, and certainly the U.S. has interests in that part of the world. And Sudan is a very large country geographically, and so we need to keep our eyes there and do what we can in the realm of the realistic, what can be realistically done, rather than kind of fantastic ideas that we're going to remake the world in our own image.
Well, sir, thank you so much for coming on and for your expertise. We appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, they meet again. Analysis from Rome on the possible sources of agreement and angst between the Vatican and President-elect Trump. Plus, U.S. church leaders gather in Maryland and vote on some important new roles. CCB has elected a new chairman for the Committee on Migration, a church leader from a diocese in Texas. Bishop Brandon Cahill is from the Diocese of Victoria, Texas. He will lead the committee that is sure to draw a lot of attention, especially in the coming Trump administration. At the fall assembly in Baltimore, Maryland, the U.S. church leaders voted on several other committee chairmen. They also listened to the words from Cardinal Christophe Pierre, the papal nuncio to the United States. Cardinal Pierre says that he hopes the upcoming Jubilee year will be filled with hope and the fruits of good work. And as we mentioned earlier, President-elect Donald Trump is assembling his cabinet and other key positions for his second term in the Oval Office. His election also means the resumption of a relationship with the Vatican. The only official reaction from the Holy See came from Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The Vatican Secretary of State wished great wisdom to the president-elect, adding that according to the Bible, wisdom is the main virtue of leaders. And joining us now from Rome is EWTN News senior Vatican analyst Frank Rocca. Frank, great to be with you as always. So what has been the reaction at the Vatican to President-elect Trump's victory?
Well, there hasn't been an official statement. The protocol is for the Pope to send a message of congratulations to the new president in January at the inauguration, and that's probably what will happen this time. There have been exceptions in the past. In 2008, Pope Benedict sent a telegram to President-elect Obama congratulating him and noting the historic occasion of the first black president. In 2020, Pope Francis actually phoned Joe Biden, presumably because Joe Biden was the first Catholic, or the second Catholic president, rather. So we can expect in January something. However, Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, spoke to reporters last week, and he was asked about this, and he said that the Vatican wishes President-elect Trump well and wishes him much wisdom, and said he hoped that he would reduce polarization in the country, and said that there are some issues where the Vatican was likely to agree with the new administration, some in which would be further away.
Yeah, Frank, I want to talk about that. What do you expect the topics will be that will be maybe sources of possible tension between Pope Francis and President Trump?
Well, obviously, on migration, the two leaders are not are far apart. I mean, the President-elect Trump has said that he's going to deport millions of undocumented immigrants from the United States. Pope Francis has said that that's would be a grave sin and that it would be against life. And Cardinal Parolin said, no, that we want a wiser policy than that, one that doesn't go to such extremes. So that's definitely a big area of difference. Another would be environmental policy. President Trump wants to increase the use of fossil fuels. Pope Francis says no. He wrote that in Laudato Si in 2015. He said reduce the use of fossil fuels, reduce carbon emissions to reduce global warming. So that's another big difference.
Frank, what about areas where we can expect them to cooperate, kind of meet in the middle?
Well, I think one potential area is the war in Ukraine, because the Pope has never ceased calling for a peaceful settlement of that war since Russia's full-scale invasion began in early 22. President Trump says he expects to resolve it in one day. So they could definitely see eye to eye on that. Cardinal Parolin noted that the President Trump hasn't explained how he would do that, resolve that war, the war in Gaza, but that certainly the Vatican is all for peace. So that's one area. Another area that the Cardinal noted is the defense of life. So that would refer broadly to bioethical issues. Of course, we know President Trump has taken a more liberal line on abortion than he did in his first term, but he has emphasized on a related issue, a kind of a bioethical or moral issue on transgender issues. Trump made that a big part of his campaign. Especially the transgender interventions for minors were mentioned as a promise that he's going to roll that back and combat that. Pope Francis has talked about about what he calls gender ideology, and he says he regrets that gender ideology is erasing the difference between men and women. But it's important to note that Pope Francis doesn't like to take a combative or kind of culture warrior approach to these issues. So it's a delicate question as to whether he'll applaud or openly endorse the Trump administration policies on that issue. Cardinal Parolin said, we like their defense of life, his defense of life, but we don't want him to take it and make it in a polarized way. We want him to build consensus. And I think that will also apply to the transgender question as well.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for your insights. Always appreciate it. Well, finally tonight, this is the 8th year since Pope Francis established the World Day of the Poor, and the Holy Father says that he will celebrate this year by hosting a lunch for 1,300 disadvantaged people in Rome. He reminded the faithful that God holds a special place in his heart for the poor, urging us to pray and volunteer to help those in need. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.